Okay, so welcome everybody to the Ins and Out webinar series. Today we're going to be speaking about fieldwork preparation, where each speaker will share with us their experiences, tips and strategies for preparing for fieldwork. For most of us, the PhD will be the most extensive and comprehensive empirical research we have ever done. So we thought having a platform for SeNS and non-SeNS student funded students alike to discuss the ins and outs of fieldwork to be an important and obvious resource. Here is a quick rundown of the program that will be going over the next 5 weeks. And so the Ins and Outs series is an initiative launched by the SeNS Student Forum and is also part of the fieldwork support groups that were set up during the first lockdown in the UK. And so if anyone would like to join the ongoing fieldwork support group, feel free to drop me an email at lja32@sussex.ac.uk and I can add you to the mailing list. We'd also like to invite anyone here if they would like to present on any of the following sessions to write us an email at the student forum, which you can see below, and Faye or myself will add you to the list as well. And it goes without saying as well, a special thanks to Faye, Paul and Abby, who have helped to put this together, has been behind the scenes, pulling the strings while I've been preparing, I guess, for fieldwork. Before we begin, just some of the house rules as well. Please keep yourself muted while individuals are presenting. The presentations will last around 15 minutes, followed by 10 minutes where you can ask questions or share any reflections. Or you can use the chat function throughout, and either Faye or Abby will be monitoring that and can draw our attention to those questions as the meeting progresses. And as always, please be supportive in your comments. We will not tolerate any derogatory or hateful speech. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm in anthropology at the University of Sussex, undertaking an 18-month ethnography where my research sets out to investigate how genomics and biotechnology are changing notions of the family and cultural identity in Iceland. My focus then is on family making and the discursive ideologies of disability which drive them. So I'm wanting to understand how genetic screening and biosocial groups formed around specific genetic conditions are changing our understanding of disability and of the family with those with or at risk of genetic conditions. I'm also using a combination of qualitative research methods streamlined through ethnography, and I draw heavily on literatures outside of anthropology and social science. Doing empirical research then, and ethnography in particular, often ends up being quite different to how we imagine it to look like. And that is actually one of the key theoretical strengths of empirical research, say, over those which don't have a theoretical or empirical focus to it. However, this bottom-up grounded theory approach requires us researchers to be very diligent, reactive and proactive in shaping the field, which can actually be quite difficult to manage because yes, on the one hand, we have these research aims and our plans for moving forward with fieldwork, but also we need to be prepared for a potential for changing track and follow different lines of inquiry that come up quite organically in the field. So this is quite a long-winded quote that I pulled from this book about fieldwork preparation, which you can look at if you want. The slides will be shared after this session. But essentially what they're saying here is that when it comes to fieldwork preparation, we need to ask ourselves some very important questions. Like, what do we already know about the thing that we're studying? What do we want to know? And also, more importantly, how can we know? And this last one is very much a question of methodology and epistemology. So what kind of methods makes it possible for us to find out about the thing we're trying to research before going somewhere to actually try and study it and find an answer to these questions? So yeah, basically, we don't want to end up with a situation like this when it could have so easily been avoided. Okay, so how to prepare then? Everyone will have a slightly different timeline and expectation when it comes to fieldwork, which inevitably requires different resources and different methods. And timelines and expectations will, of course, be tied to most of us with our roles as SeNSS funded students, but also the milestones of producing research outlines for our own institutions, as well as having different disciplinary and epistemic commitments that we make explicit through the research proposal. And I myself have a 1+3 funded studentship. And for those who are also on this pathway, this does give you an extra time to plan and put together a strong research proposal, despite the fact that the MSc is also a degree in and of itself. So first thing I would advise then is to develop a system for systematically organizing your work early on, by which I don't just mean literature, but also for field notes and research diary, a research journal, etc. And take some time to think about what works for you before and do this as early as you can before field work. And don't be afraid to experiment with different styles, as well as plugging into different resources like academia.edu to keep up to date with current research. And if you start recording your learning processes from the start, from early on, before data collection, something like a research diary, for example, you have started some of the heavy lifting now. So I remember I was told about the referencing managing software Zotero for managing my literature, and it does actually help to store and keep hold of your sources in one place. But I'm actually quite a visual learner. I don't know about anyone else. Zotero doesn't actually cater for that. It doesn't allow me to see or engage critically with the ideas. I actually came to my research because I didn't have the answers. There was a lot of questions that I had. I don't have expertise or a personal connection to the people or place that I'm doing my fieldwork in. All I had was questions and a sense that something just wasn't making sense. So for me, Zotero is literally just a depository to store sources, but it's not enough for me to engage with them. And there's this idea that fieldwork, and especially overseas fieldwork, begins and ends with physically entering and leaving a place. But a major part of this research is this journey that you as a researcher embark on from the moment the project is conceived, and as you develop your own stance and navigate the multiple theoretical frameworks that could be used to shed light on a thing you set out to study. So what I did then is I created a number of different folders for things such as empirical literature, methodology, ethics, conceptual framework, research reflections, etc. For my literature review, what I have a folder with different sections within that folder, one for empirical ethnographic sources, one for methodology, one for secondary data, one for ethics, and another one for theory, where I single out individual theoretical concepts and approaches that I think are really important, and I just write about it freehand. So with all these journals, book chapters, and secondary data I've read and collected so far, I make a short summary of the aims and the arguments from the author, as well as a short section for background information and references that I could then look at as and when I need to, basically. So one of the best bits of advice my supervisor gave me, actually, when it comes to reading, is to always have a reason for reading whatever it is that you are looking at. So what I do is I try to write 1 or 2 sentences that say why I'm reading it, what is it that I'm looking for, as well as a short reflection after reading it, summarizing what I've learned from it. And that will basically lend itself to be very useful, because you know whether or not you could discard certain sources or not. And this actually helps improve my reading as well. And it takes me half the time it does now than when it did before, because now I'm proactive with reading, not passively trying to memorize everything that they have to say. I'm very selective in what I want, and I think that was the best bit of advice I got from my supervisor. So yeah, here's some examples of what I did, and these are actually extracts from like my research diary, research journal that I started taking way before fieldwork. And so by the time you come to start using interviews, observations, focus groups, etc., all of which I'm actually using, you already have something to interpret and locate your emerging findings with. So it saves you a lot of time, and it's really important to analyze and manage your data throughout the field work, not just at the end. So anyway, why use scoping trips? It's the main part of what I'll be sharing with you today. And where does it fit in with fieldwork preparation? So scoping trips help to define the scope, the breadth, and the depth of the intended research. As I said before, fieldwork preparation is about asking yourself a lot of questions, and we might not know which kind of methods we want to use, for example, or which kind of people we want to speak with if it doesn't end up making sense in the field. So similarly, the topic you were tackling may have changed quite substantially since your ideas were first coming together. I know COVID has made that obvious for many people's researchers, but there are other things which can also be very unforeseen, very sudden as well. So a scoping trip can help to trial your research before you commit to something that ends up not making sense. Scoping trips also help to redefine research objectives and priorities, and the feasibility of and design of your research may need rethinking in light of that, because we all have other priorities besides our research, and knowing how we are to balance them might not be obvious until you spend a little bit of time in the field, testing the water, so to speak. Scoping trips also can also help us to budget appropriately, to save time and money and resources in the long run. You can ask me about that later if you want, because it definitely did for me. Just admit something in, yeah. Scoping trips also help to develop the visibility and positionality of the researcher. Again, I could say more about that in a minute, but essentially knowing who's who and how we come across to others is crucial. Why try to find out everything on your own? Why not ask for help from other experts rather than assume a certain method or approach is best? Using a scoping trip is actually a short time focused opportunity for us to see what are the most effective ways for us to move forward. Sorry. So why did I choose a scoping trip then? Well, for a few reasons, and primarily because of COVID. So there was this massive delay in my research timeline, approximately 10 months, maybe a bit more than that. And I was knocked sideways from the pandemic as well. And unfortunately, one of the consequences for me was not only had I lost a lot of time, but I lost a lot of confidence in myself as a researcher, in my ideas, and in my ability to execute the project. As well, the combined effects of Brexit and the pandemic had also meant so much more bureaucracy, and it was virtually impossible to find and even put down a payment for suitable accommodation and obtain the necessary residence permits and visas to stay in Iceland. So the plan was then for me that I would go to Iceland, sort some of this stuff out, trial a few things, come back, meet with my supervisors, take stock of the research and where I am, and carve out a detailed battle plan for me to move forward. So my scoping trip was 66 days, and this lined up with returning to the UK in time for second vaccination, actually, which was perfect. Again, goes back to what I was saying with balancing the personal and your professional academic commitments. It was also very difficult for me to identify gatekeepers remotely, and knowing who's who and how different institutions and organizations work together was very difficult. So I just went, so by actually being here, I was able to find out really quickly, and it helped a lot. I was also feeling very guilty that I was not really keeping to my language commitments. I needed to be in Iceland to use and experience Icelandic daily. And I really struggled in the meantime to learn on my own in an everyday environment, the UK, where it just didn't make sense. Lastly, I'll just mention patchwork ethnography as an approach that resonated with me early on when it comes to fieldwork preparation. Essentially, it's an approach that invites us to reconsider how we do research, and was particularly attracted to this concept because it allowed me to justify the breaking up of research into stages. And it also combats this kind of ableist culture that comes to fieldwork and academic research in general. I could say more about that again later if you have a question about it. So when I was in Iceland, then I spent most of my time trying to plug into everyday life without the pressure of trying to be this data sponge. So when I wasn't house hunting and filling out endless amounts of paperwork and things like that, I was spending most of my time in cafes, seeing the landscapes, and effectively seeing what was possible for me to do in Iceland, given COVID. And for some reason, the stars actually just aligned very quickly for me, and I was able to obtain what is called a Kenatala and a residence permit very quickly just from being here. And I had already made contact with families remotely beforehand, so now I had the chance to meet them in person, get to know each other. Now that then that domestic restrictions in Iceland were loosening, and face-to-face contact for me is invaluable for the kinds of research I'm doing. And I found that asking families to put me in touch with others to develop that network was much more organic, was much more natural, and much easier than trying to force an approach that doesn't make sense in Iceland. So although I only managed to formally do one interview in my 66-day scoping trip, I was able to learn what worked moving forward. I was able to know what kind of techniques I was to use with different informants. For example, I very much wanted to steer away from the typical audio recorded 30-minute interview. And I had this idea of doing walking interviews and writing short summaries instead of producing verbatim transcripts. And this scoping trip definitely helped me reaffirm the importance of doing that. I also met with a few academics at the university, and this was part of me developing my positionality and visibility as a researcher from the UK. This is, also ongoing, my informal conversations of familiarizing myself with the university, making them familiar with me and the existing research that was taking place. Yeah, so yes, people's research and specialisms can be found online, but I also found that there was a lot of research in the works that I would have not been aware of had I not spoke with them and tried to find out what our shared interests are. So yeah, lastly then, what did I learn from all of this? Well, ethnography requires a lot of patience and self-discipline. There will be days where nothing is really happening. I did get bored and frustrated that things weren't working out and were not moving faster than I wanted it to. Also, from my initial conversations with university academics and just everyday people and friends that I've come across so far, I learned that interviews will need to be much more structured than I expected. As well, the cliche geneticist reputation as being hostile to social researchers is very real. I had an experience with that. So I now know that I need to learn more effective techniques to minimize this impact. So along with that, I learned that snowballing just has to take precedence as a recruitment strategy for my research. It's much more effective than I anticipated, even if it means progressing at a slower pace. It's definitely much more effective. Also, things will still go wrong, but that's okay. For example, since coming back to Iceland after the scoping trip, I managed to get myself locked out of my apartment at 2 a.m. in the middle of what was a storm on the day I landed. I had complications with renewing my residency, registering for a legal address, a wisdom tooth incident, a very hostile research encounter with a geneticist, and a rise in the number of COVID cases, which has since prohibited a lot of fieldwork activity. So the point is not to try and prevent anything from going wrong ever, because that's just unreasonable and frankly impossible. But if you can put some of these preparatory stones in place at the beginning, it will definitely cushion the blow for when some of these things go wrong, and it will help to get you back on track easier. So yeah, I guess in sum, the scoping trip actually exceeded my expectations. I did not have all of this pressure to start all of the research at once, but what it did do is it helped to put the wheels in motion and gave me a foundation from which I can now build my projects now that I have around 15 months of research left. And I think as well, yeah, some people's research could also benefit from it, by breaking it up into different stages, which is very important for reflection. But yes, that's the end of what I have to say. So, yeah. Cool. So I'm just going to have a look at the things in the chat. Faye, are you able to take on from me now? Because I've been speaking for a while. I don't want this to become a Luke webinar.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that presentation, Luke. It was really good and really insightful. I think a lot of people will find that particularly helpful. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, specifically for Luke, you want to write them in the chat now or pop your hand up, I can take them, or we can all save them for the end if you think of any as we go through. We've also got Abby here until 3 as well. So if you've got any particular questions about the process of planning your fieldwork before you go, just pop any questions over to Abby. So I think I can't see any questions so far in the chat. So if we go to our next speaker, which I think is it Bianca? Is Bianca there?
I am. If I have to be, actually, I do have a question for Luke. If I'm still in time.
Yeah, cool.
I was thinking back about, you did a whole lot of preparation before going on your first scouting trip, and you kind of went there with like a very clear idea of what kind of methods were available to you, and you kind of had the chance to test them out. And I found that for me, the idea that I had about what I was going to do before going in the field was so changed by being in the field that I kind of had to like, and also the specific requirement of being present in the field, like in a very physical sense, and participating, made it so that like the things I thought I could do, I could definitely not do. And I guess I didn't do a scouting trip, and that's, you're very right, I should have done it. I would have known that. But I, in a sense, like I found myself having to scrap quite a lot of the work I'd done for like a good year before, and it was very frustrating. I don't know if you, yeah, if that applied to you as well, like how did you navigate that experience of kind of having to abandon the thing that you had worked on for so long, to some extent, or some aspects of it?
Yes, yes, definitely. So basically, when I was kind of putting together the research proposal and the timeline that I had, I wanted to combine, the first phase of my research with my commitments to language training, and I identified this what's called like an eco village to be the first place that I was going to conduct the research. It all has some kind of connection with my project, as it's quite a controversial institution that's been linked with quite nefarious ideas around disability and things like that. So it was an opportunity for me to just do very light participant observation whilst also using Icelandic every day. But I didn't go there to begin with, primarily because of the obstacles because of COVID. So I had to kind of abandon that research site. The idea that I would live there for a few months and then I would move to Reykjavik, the city, and then conduct the rest of the fieldwork there. But in the scoping trip, I just went there. I visited the place once, and I've come to realize that actually it's not as important as I'd anticipated it to be in the project proposal, and that I could have more of an episodic approach, what I call an episodic approach with this community / institution, whatever you want to call it, if I start to think, actually, no, I should go back. So it doesn't need me to be there, to live there every day. So yeah, I did end up giving up on that. This was this whole 3-month phase of my fieldwork that was dedicating to that place that just very quickly became obsolete, I guess. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Siobhan, have you raised your hand there?
Oh.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you for sharing. just to mention, I mean, I can identify with a lot of the things that you've said and also that Bianca has said as well. I did do a scoping trip to Antigua before. I'm in the field now, I've been here for a month, and I did do a scoping trip back last September, I think it was, when travel opened up, because I thought, you know, get out there, see what's going on. But I had lots and lots of experience of being in Antigua. I've got family and friends here, so I didn't plan on doing a scoping trip, but I did find it very useful because it felt like, okay, finally I'm doing something. Did manage to do a few interviews, and that was great. I didn't realize the importance of preparing to be in the field, especially because, as I said, I took it for granted that I knew Antigua well. So, you know, I can get here and just had this romantic notion of, yes, I'll be here, I'll be the anthropologist doing my research, blah, blah, blah. We had a meeting last week where I shared that, yes, things are going really well. I've got contacts, they've introduced me to people. I've started doing a couple of interviews, felt like, great, things are going as they should be, everything's fantastic. And then what I was struggling with, and I'm still struggling with, is the field notes. I was finding I just couldn't make sense of what I was thinking, couldn't make sense of anything that would make sense to put it down on paper. So I've got loads of pages of thoughts and notes and scribbles that I know if I look back, a lot of them won't make sense, but I'm trying to get something down because I know I should. I had a really useful conversation yesterday with somebody who has done a year's fieldwork, and she explained to me, you know, my supervisor said, first of all, the first 3 months, don't do any interviews, just immerse yourself into the field, be there, go to places that you don't usually go to, especially because you know Antigua, be around people that you're not usually around. And I thought, yeah, fine. I didn't really think much of it, and thought, I'm running out of time, I need to get on with my interviews. But it wasn't until I had that conversation yesterday, and she said, no, your supervisor's actually absolutely right. The first 3 months of you being in the field, you kind of have to look at yourself as an informant, and you need to look at yourself as, you need to get to know yourself as an informant, because there'll be things that you don't really know about yourself as a researcher, the things that you don't really know about yourself living in Antigua, because although you've been here before, you've not lived there in this way before. And she said the things that don't make sense are the things that you do need to write down, because they may help you later on to inform your autoethnography, but also to kind of help you with your analysis when you're looking at, well, why did those things make you uncomfortable? Why did those things not make sense? And there are so many things, even the heat, which I was so looking forward to, and I found it so annoying. It's just really been irritating, you know, and I can't understand why. But she said all of that, make notes of all of that. And I found that really useful. Once she, I mean, obviously not that I no disrespect to my supervisor, who did tell me to do exactly that, but speaking to her, it made sense. Okay, now that I'm here, yeah, all of that is still useful. The interviews that I've done, I'm taking a pause now, and I will take the next 2 months to do exactly what she said, go to places where I would usually not go. One of the things we do, people expect a lot in Antigua if you're driving, is to get lifts from people, because it's a small place, not many people have cars. I was advised, no, don't give anybody lifts, but it's something that I've started doing. I am being safe, I promise, but I've started doing, because that way you get connections and you get to meet people as well. So just basically letting you know that, yeah, being, as I said, somebody who felt I didn't need preparation for the field, I'm now realizing, yeah, I definitely did. And now that I'm here, it's not what I expected. So I really do need to take the time to be immersed, as they say, in the field, and you know, that hopefully will help to inform my findings later on. But again, just wanted to thank you for being so candid with your sharing, Luke.
Oh, thank you. Well. No worries.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Luke, I think we've got one more question in the chat for you, and then we'll move on to our next presenter. So Lily's asked, would you mind talking a bit about your language study? What sorts of resources you used before / after going to Iceland? Yeah, I think that's the question. Yeah,
sure. I mean, I'll keep it really short and sweet, because it would be good to get Bianca going on that, on her presentation. But yeah, it was very difficult for me to find resources at first from the UK. There's not much online resources that I could have made use of, and that was why it was so important for me to get out into the fields, you know, very quickly. but what kind of online resources there were, you know, the occasional YouTube video, I did make use of. I did buy a couple of books as well, just for independent study. So that was mostly what I did before coming to Iceland, was independent study. But you know, it was very difficult for me. One, I find it very difficult to commit to something in an environment where it just doesn't make sense. I also don't know any other languages apart from English, so I don't know. It's learning a language is one thing, but also learning how to learn a language was really difficult for me. I was trying to look for a private tutor. Didn't have much luck for, you know, the first like half a year, but I did come across one just by accident, I think, and I'm still in contact with my private tutor, having once a week lessons for around about an hour and a half that I pay for, using the RTSG, the Research Training Support Grant that is available to SeNSS funded students. What I'm trying to do now is I'm finding private classes and stuff, because there's lots of things going on in Iceland that I wouldn't have been able to make use of from the UK. So I'm just basically doing that, really, and it's trial and error. I also find the best way that I can learn a language is not to try and force myself to learn grammar or things like that. It's just go straight over my head. So when I learn certain phrases of like how to say things, I just repeat it, and I try and force myself into situations where I could use that phrase over and over and over again. It might be pretty funny, but the famous Icelandic hot dogs, for example, I memorized how to order one of those in different variations, and it's just what Icelandic people do. So finding out what people do in the community that you're researching, and what kind of language they're using within that situation is very important. So yeah, I mean, I can have a conversation with you afterwards, but let's get on to Bianca, shall we?
Brilliant, thank you for that, Luke. Right, Bianca, would you like to take the floor?
Oh, I'm gonna try to share my screen. See if I can manage. Sorry, terrible at Zoom. Okay. All right, can you all see it? Great. So ethnographic practice and self-knowledge doing field work at home. My name is Bianca, and I'm a second year PhD student, sorry, from Goldsmiths. I'm an anthropologist. I started around the same time as Luke and Siobhan, and I think I'm more or less at the same point. I'm also like Siobhan, I'm a month into my field work. So today's presentation is going to be about my own journey from research design to fieldwork, which wasn't as smooth as I would have hoped. I'm going to discuss some of the problems I encountered translating my research project into an actionable plan, some of the strategies that worked for me, and with some limited benefit of insight, things I wish I'd done differently. You see three pictures here. One is a picture of the Newark people. That was one of the first ethnographies I read, the ethnography of the Newark peoples by Evans Richard, and it kind of, to me, really represents the kind of training that I received where I studied anthropology, which was very classical, sometimes even reactionary, I would say. And the next picture is a picture of the steelworks in my hometown. They were set up. The third picture is a picture of Giacomo Cimarelli, who is a partisan communist fighter who was born in my hometown and died in my hometown. And you, I think, will figure out later on why that picture is meaningful. So first, a brief point of clarification: what is anthropology at home? What does it even make sense? I think perhaps for some people who are field workers but are anthropologists, this denomination won't be as meaningful. The distinction between doing research at home and among other peoples was built into the social sciences as a division of labor between sociologists and anthropologists. While both were broadly preoccupied with beliefs and social practices, let's say that traditionally the sociologist observed his own society or one similar, while the anthropologists tried to make sense of other cultures. Indeed, when picturing anthropologists, lots of people, many of my research participants, still think of Malinovskian. So Malinovsky is that guy there in the white linen suit. Whoever removed to a faraway country encounters people and a culture that are thoroughly other from his, attempts to know them and make them knowable to the people back home, often to the imperial metropolitan public. So of course, and this kind of methods for anthropological research are coterminous with colonialism. So there's a great article by Marisa Perano, which briefly reviews indigenous anthropologies of the early 20th century. And she shows that already back then, at the beginning of anthropology, people were making knowledge of other cultures, but these were researchers who were at the margin of empire, mostly in China and India, and were kind of kept marginal to anthropological knowledge production. By the late 60s, there's this kind of growing anxiety about the fact that the object of anthropological knowledge is disappearing, no? And so there's a need to find new objects by legitimizing different kinds of research, knowledge about, let's say, the kind of, so-called complex societies, which really stands in for Western and industrialized societies. So what makes anthropology different from sociology or other kind of qualitative disciplines that use qualitative research method? The idea, Levi-Strauss says, is that there is something specific to anthropology about the relationship between observers and the observed. That's where they are. And why did I feel the need to tell you about this at all? I think that way of thinking about anthropology, the way of conceptualizing anthropological observation, which remains quite ambiguous, is kind of what haunted me throughout the process of designing my research project, because I'm doing research about my hometown and thinking about how I could get to know things, how I would be able to see things. So the pictures here are, well, a picture of Malinovsky in the Drogland Islands and two pictures from one of my favorite anthropologists, Sharon Kazmi, was a labor anthropologist, and she does research with trade union movements in her hometown of Reading, which is in Pennsylvania. It's kind of like a Rust Belt town. So here she's on the picket line with different people, two different groups protesting for fight for 15, like a higher minimum wage. How to organize ethnography, how to gaze ethnographically upon familiar objects and master objects stand at their contours. So when I decided to do research about my hometown, I found myself with two sets of problems, let's say. So the first was that doing research at home meant I would have to forego the many gifts of strangeness, what I thought were the many gifts of strangeness. Curious objects of ethnographic analysis would not just jump at me. And I was terrified that my gaze, dulled by familiarity with its objects, would kind of never be ethnographic enough. They would like see things, but not be able to denormalize them, because I thought that was what I was supposed to be doing as an ethnographer, to look at kind of structures of meanings, of power, etc., and denormalize them by comparison, either with the kind of my own theories or like my own structures, or comparison of objects. And in that kind of preoccupation, I ended up writing perhaps a too ambitious research project about my hometown. I wrote this huge, sprawling research project, which was about care, the relationship between care, labor, and state. Because I didn't want to limit myself to one field site, thinking that, you know, I know this town so well, I know so many things about it. I thought I had both the capacity and kind of like the almost obligation to move across a lot of field sites. Drawing on to all of these personal connections that I have to the place, all of these people that I know that were working in places which would give me information, all of the people I went to school with, they're kind of experiencing labor and care in different ways. I wrote this massive research project, which was basically about following the flow of benefits payments through union offices, administrative offices of the local authority, through private households, I hope the dozens of them, of the people that were receiving these benefits, etc., etc. At that point, I went and set my viva, and my advisors kindly told me that I had to downsize if I wanted to finish my PhD in the 2 remaining years of allocated funding. And as I quite literally wept during my upgrade viva, I was told I could only pick one site and one site alone. And that's how I got to the place where I'm doing research now, which is the CSA Germinal Cimarelli. So Germinal Cimarelli is the gentleman on the far right of the 3 pictures that you saw at the beginning of this presentation. CSA is short for Centro Sociale Autogestito, which roughly translates to Autonomous Social Center. And the social center is named after Germinal Cimarelli, a local communist steel worker and resistance fighter who was killed in the mountains just north of Terni. I kind of skipped that bit. I forgot to tell you that my hometown is a steel town. It's an industrial town, and it's very much, marked by industrial work, but also by the industrialization. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, I developed a political and academic interest in radical or antagonistic mutual aid practices. There were lots in London, there were lots in Northern Italy, where I had some friends that were organizing. So that was kind of my origin, the origin of my interest in the relationship in between labor and formal and informal welfare systems, that kind of what had occasioned kind of what have engendered a massive research project that I wrote first. That's also how I founded Cimarelli, which was the one place in Terni that had organized a truly grassroots mutual aid initiative. They ran a weekly food bank and delivered food packs, medicine, and clothing to people shielding. So I got there as a volunteer, and then I kind of found myself deciding to stay as an activist and researcher, not so much because that's really what I wanted, but kind of like because that's the one answer I could give to my advisors during those tragic hours of my viva. So I now am part of the assembly. Here's some pictures actually of the mutual aid stuff that we do, foods that we collect, that we get donated by the neighbors or by neighboring shops or by neighboring agriculturers, and the food that we collect to food donations, and the stuff that some of the people that organize with us or receive the food packs make, and then we kind of circulate through the mutual aid program. So I'm now part of the assembly that runs the space. I run the mutual aid initiatives and most of the events that we organize, be they skill sharing days, collective childcare days, music gigs, or fundraising dinners. Which leads us to perhaps the most interesting part of this presentation. Once I found myself at home in the field, what are the difficulties that I encounter and what strategies have helped me cope? So first, the thing I wanted to remark on is the importance of nurturing research communities for yourselves, both in the field and outside the field. So Siobhan has already spoken about the kind of fieldwork support group that we have going here. I also, like Siobhan did, kind of try to also make a network of mentors for myself, which are who are not my supervisors. And by talking with them frequently throughout the fieldwork, I kind of, they really helped me reflect about what kind of methods were there other than the ones I thought would work for me, when the ones I thought would work weren't working, different methods of writing notes, different methods of recording notes, or through photos or audio messages, for example, as well as kind of helping me navigate workload when you're doing fieldwork is different from workload when you're doing research at home. So even like allowing yourself to take days of break days, which is something that I wasn't doing at the beginning before people told me I could. I felt really guilty about not being doing fieldwork. Now I actually realized that I need those days of break, and on top of those, any days of reflections was not being in the field because it's really full on. But also kind of community of research in my field. So when I brought my research problem to my research participants, namely the issue of the relationship between labor, care, and the state in my hometown, most of them found it too vague to be interesting. Perhaps they were right. So when I asked them what kind of useful work I could do in the Cimarelli as a researcher, their answers, it feels to me, pointed me towards useful lines of inquiry. So I've been asked to archive the organizing cultures which have made and remade this space throughout time. I've been asked to map the relationship between this space and other similar spaces in central Italy. I've been asked to write and deliver a workers' inquiry about public health and privatizations and austerity in my hometown. And I've been asked to help run a research project which asks women involved in local politics how they became politically active. Now, of course, I don't think I can do all of these things and I can do them well. But I do believe that allowing my research participants to guide my practice has allowed me to rediscover my field as a living archive of cultures of care, which can illuminate broader transformations in local political economy, from environmentalism to resistance to the privatization of health provision, for example. And I think these are all aspects that are going to be important to my research. Yeah, and so I think these are kind of the two things that really helped me through nurturing a collective dimension to my research. Through seeking help, or actually through trying and establish some sort of like co-research practice with my research participants. But what things am I still struggling with very much? And it leads us to what Luke was talking about before, and also Siobhan spoke about. I didn't do a scoping trip. I thought I didn't need one, because I was born and raised in this town. I spent the first 18 years of my life, and I thought, I'm so familiar with everything. Why would I need to do a scoping trip? I go there every Christmas. But it's a very different thing being in a place and doing research in a place. Okay. So yesterday I was talking about the most challenging aspects of my field work with a friend who's a therapist, and she told me that entering in a group setting always entails at first what she called the near psychotic phase, where in order to be allowed in, we renounce all of our boundaries. And that's what you do if you do research within a community when you do field work, especially if you're gonna see all of these people every day. You kind of are plunged into these networks that were completely strange to you before, even if you knew the town, even if you knew the place, you didn't know all of these people. And you find yourself, you know, doing things in every day which are not the things that you do at home. And I think you really feel compelled to kind of always go with it at the beginning. And that's something that I'm still struggling with very much. The things I do, I eat and drink every day are not the ones I'm used to. Sometimes I do things I wish I wouldn't have to because I feel my research would suffer if I said no. Other times I do things I know that will affect my research, like drinking during a soccer game, for example. That's not conducive to good field notes. But at the time, maybe it feels like that's the one correct way of participating in that moment. And because I'm not the man in the pit, I'm not a conspicuous observer, I am asked and feel compelled to participate at all times. So that's what I'm struggling with the most. And I really think if I'd done a scouting trip, perhaps I would have known better what to expect. I would have known better, yeah, the kind of the resources, moral and physical, that being in the field would cost me. So the kind of questions that I would encourage you to really think about what a week in your field would look like. How long will you observe on a given day? How much time will you have to record your observation? Will it be appropriate for you to take notes in the field? If not, how else will you cope? Will you take notes on transport going back home from the field, for example? All of these things I didn't really think about as much. I thought about methods like, oh, you know, biographical interview or but I didn't think about how practically, materially I would be doing all of these things. And lastly, the kind of parting recommendation I'm going to leave you with is I wish I'd read as much ethnography as I read theory going into the field work. I think I regret not giving me the opportunity to train my eye to look for things on the ground rather than look for the reflections of my theoretical preoccupations. And what I'm trying to do now is to choose like really like a handful of ethnographies that really spoke to me throughout my kind of training and writing my research proposal, and bring them with me in the field and go back to them and use them as a guide and as a crutch as I go on working. I'm doing that now, which is perhaps belatedly, but I'm getting a lot from it. So that's my advice to all of you. And sorry for the long and sprawling presentation. It did come in the wake of many football game and party with children and smoke bombs, and it was really, really, really intense week. But I hope you got something from this.
Thank you so much, Bianca. That was a fantastic presentation. And again, some slightly different insights for people to kind of understand. We're just going to move on to Tom's presentation because we're slightly running over. I have noticed there is a question for you, Bianca, from Cassie. But if we save that to the end, if that's okay, Cassie, and then we can do all the questions for you and Tom together. So Tom, are you there?
Hello.
Brilliant. So Tom is going to be presenting preparing for overseas fieldwork, making plans, building relationships, and self-care. So the floor is yours, Tom.
Okay, I did just make some slides because I felt guilty not having any. So hold on. Just let me share. Okay, does everyone see that? Is that all good? Nice. Okay, so my name's Tom Bell. I am a, is this full screen? Yeah, it is full screen. I'm a PhD student at the University of Kent. I'm in my continuation year now of my PhD. So I'm in the kind of, I have to move back home because I have no money stage of life, which is great. But so I did a 3-year PhD, so not a 1+3. And I've always been jealous of people that have done a 1+3 because I do think it does give you an opportunity to make plans, and you know, it just gives you more time, which is a great thing. My PhD, just briefly, is so I'm trying to develop responsibility as an analytical concept to explore social movement responses to the climate crisis in the context of the Green New Deal in the United States. So I examine the relationship between justice and urgency in climate politics, and as well as modes of political organizing in the US. My fieldwork took place I did 15 months fieldwork from July 2018 through to October 2019, and I worked with social movement organizations and organizers in the greater Boston area of Massachusetts. And the organization I worked with was a kind of network of statewide activists who were supported by an affiliated nonprofit. So a lot of my fieldwork was spent volunteering in the office and in the office of this nonprofit, and directly participating in the work of activists and you know, get involved in the kinds of activism that they were doing, the politics that they were doing, and interviews obviously as well. So I did, as well as my main field work, I did do a scoping trip, although I never actually thought of calling it a scoping trip, but it was a scoping trip. And yeah, and this was really invaluable. I just spent a week, I think it was in February 2018, in order to meet prospective research participants and make contingency plans. And I'd never actually been over to the US before, so it was, you know, it was just a really good way of making things tangible as opposed to being an abstract plan, which I think is very important. And I actually used my RTSG budget for this, but I don't know if that's still the case, considering this was now somehow 3.5 years ago. So Luke and Bianca covered a lot about ethnography as a research technique and provided great insights, and kind of looked at, you know, provided insights into the kind of theory and methodology of ethnography as well. But my talk will be kind of quite candid and a very practical look at fieldwork as a period of living your life, as opposed to simply collecting data for your PhD, and the kinds of very basic questions that I was confronted with at the beginning of developing my plans to go to the field. And hopefully in so doing, I shall take some of the stresses off of you that I had when I tried to begin my fieldwork. And I think just the thing to stress is that one of the reasons why fieldwork takes a long time, particularly in anthropology, is not simply because of this abstract notion of cultural immersion, but because it's a challenge, and it takes a lot of time to make plans, to position yourself to develop a new life overseas, or even in the same city that you are doing your PhD as well. So let's move on. So I think the first thing that I want to talk about with regards to making plans is navigating bureaucracy, which, and I think bureaucracy can be a very useful thing, but also it can be a quite opaque thing, and a thing that you kind of have to, and it involves lots of elements that you're not necessarily told before you start engaging with it. So you're not giving a list of all of the things that you need to sort out before you go. You have to like develop it as you go and make mistakes and acquire knowledge from a range of resources. So as Bianca and Luke have said, you know, things rarely go to plan, but plans are really important. So you're ready to respond and to demonstrate to funders mostly that your project is feasible and its costs are reasonable. When thinking about bureaucracy, I think the key question to like keep in your mind is, what are the things I need to do in order to actually go to the field? You know, what are the basic things that I need to do in order to transition from place A to place B? And for me, that was a question of, how am I going to get a visa, and where am I going to live, and how much money do I need in order to live? And you know, you're a researcher, you're not just a researcher, but you're a living being with needs, and needs cost money and require contingencies and plans. So let's have a look at the first one. So the first one here is the question of visas. And now I decided to do my research project on the US, in the US, and obtaining a visa to go to the US, it turned out was a pretty difficult thing. It wasn't something that I'd really thought about when I kind of proposed the project from the beginning. And unfortunately, the bureaucracy around visas is like the most opaque that it can be. You know, so questions I think that you need to ask are, how much do they cost? What visa categories are available to you? And do you need to get sponsorship in order to get a visa? So for me, I think my visa cost about £750. It was very difficult to work out from the beginning what visa category was available to me. I ended up being a J1 research scholar, which meant that I had to be sponsored by an institution in the US in order to say that my project was like part of a kind of cultural exchange of knowledge between the UK and the US. And so that meant that I ended up being a research scholar at Tufts University, and I got sponsored by the head of anthropology at Tufts, and had to develop a relationship with administrators over at Tufts before I went. And this was in like the winter of 2018. I went in July 2018. Now, there are lots of benefits to getting institutional sponsorship for your visa, if indeed you do need a visa, because it looks pretty good if not only are you going to do fieldwork and you've got funding to do fieldwork, but also you've become a visiting scholar at another kind of university abroad, you've got institutional relationships, and yeah, it's just like another feather to your bow. And being a visiting scholar, I was able to do some teaching and just generally participate in the life of the department, yeah, which was really beneficial to kind of my career as an anthropologist as well. The next question is insurance, and insurance is like a really big issue, really important issue, but also a very costly issue. And also it can be an immigration requirement, of course. It definitely is in the US. And when I first came across this, I didn't even realize that the University of Kent had insurance cover that students could use, because for whatever reason, I just didn't have that information to hand. And so I ended up, being insured through the University of Kent's cover, which was very comprehensive, but it had a maximum of 365 days per kind of insurance period. So it meant I did have to break up my field work, which then obviously had considerations about costs and plans. So like thinking about insurance is really important, whilst boring, but really important. Living arrangements, where are you going to live and how are you going to sort out where you're going to live? Is subletting a common practice where you are? Can you get included on local student forums, bearing in mind you might be going to a place that you've never lived before? So one of the things that I managed to do through my institutional sponsorship with Tufts was put out a call for sublets on a student forum, and that enabled me to get kind of 3 months accommodation before I found a longer year-long lease in a shared room. Income thresholds. This could also be an immigration requirement. Can you prove to whatever country you're going to that you're going to be able to support yourself for the duration of your time there and for the duration you have a visa? In the US, this was a threshold above what I had in terms of funding. So, or at least it was a threshold set by Tufts, who was my institutional sponsor, above what I got as funding. So I had to have a guarantor, just like, you know, a guarantor for rent, for if you you know, rent a property, you often need a guarantor. So I had to have a guarantor, which was like a fine thing to sort out, but again, it's like a contingency that you don't necessarily think of when you start to think of developing your research project. And then finally, yeah, Luke mentioned this problem of fieldwork being this very ableist thing, which it, you know, it definitely is. Thinking about how your particular circumstance, your particular access needs are gonna impact how long you can stay in the field for, whether you break up your fieldwork periods, the kinds of research that you can do, I think is a really important kind of honest conversation to have with yourself. And so one of the things that I needed was, I'm on long-term medication, so I needed to think of ways in which to like ensure that I would be able to take my medication during the course of my fieldwork, bearing in mind that I wasn't able to get a prescription while I was in the US. So I had to I can talk to people kind of privately about what I did to get around that, but it's definitely a consideration that you need to think of. Okay, so in all of these issues is the problem of budgeting, and budgeting is I think a really important skill to learn as a researcher, because you're going to spend a lot of your time, if you go into a career in academia, making funding proposals, and funders want to know that your project is going to be cost effective. So this is I found this a really useful skill to be able to learn, especially considering in the past I've been like terrible at budgeting. So I found that my overseas fieldwork, the overseas fieldwork grant available through SeNSS was really good for paying for my upfront costs, but there was a cost of living adjustment that was meant that my subsistence costs were more or less going to be the same as if I was living in London, and I wasn't living in London at the time. So I made so as part of my overseas fieldwork funding application, I also asked for an additional amount of money for living expenses and for being able to undertake research as well. Obviously, this was quite a while ago, so I don't know whether the process is still the same. But the questions that I asked myself were very basic, like, how much is it going to cost for me to eat and drink every week? How am I going to travel around, and how am I going to pay rent? And eat and drink and paying rent are obvious questions, but how I can travel around, I think, is a really important question that you need to ask yourself, because it depends on, you know, because travel is key to doing research, right? So, for example, when I was in Boston, I factored in how much it was going to cost to like have a weekly travel card, and I factored in the costs of renting zip cars and renting, you know, and renting vehicles. I also took my bike with me. I have a folding bike, and I took my bike with me to the field. You know, like, I think that these basic questions are really important. So just to conclude this section, and I will just very briefly talk about the other things. Like, I think plan is really important, but be flexible, and you're going to learn as you go, and that's okay. And, you know, it's fine. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to learn as a human being as you do them, and it's great. Think of a plan B. Like, contingency plans are really important, and I'll just touch on that briefly in a minute. And then just like ask for help, ask for help from other PhD students, ask for help people from scholars that have done field work in your area of expertise, the area where you're going. Ask for help from university administrators, ask for help from SeNSS, ask for help from your supervisors, ask for help from academics. You know, everyone is there to help you, and just be confident in asking for help, and also be bold in making connections. Like it was I didn't, you know, I when I was trying to get my visa, my first strategy was to get my supervisor to make a connection with an academic in the US in order to sponsor me. And I ended up just doing it myself. And that was a far better way of doing it than like relying on a supervisor, because that takes time. There's like many other factors, you know, that you have to take into account. But just doing it yourself is like, I think, the best strategy. So I can see that I'm running a bit out of time. What would be the most useful thing for me to talk about? I think I'm just going to talk about contingency plans quickly. And this is, I think, really important because, you know, relationships are the core of fieldwork. And before you go to do your fieldwork, even from the beginning of you like starting to develop your research project, you're going to be developing, or hope you're going to be developing, relationships with people that you hope to be working with. And but you know, sometimes people that say that they're willing to do things change their minds, because it's quite weird having an anthropologist coming to work with them. So thinking of plan Bs and thinking about how you could potentially deal with those kind of like things that can go wrong in the field, I think is quite important. And using your scoping trip is a good opportunity to do that. So I both met with the primary organization that I wanted to work with, but I also like met with other organizations and other activists and other networks as well, just so I kind of had them in my back pocket for when I went. And I think I'll just end by emphasizing the importance of self-care in both going to the field and in leaving the field. And leaving the field is not something that's ever spoken about, but actually for me, that was the most stressful thing. Yeah, I think it's a kind of failing of anthropology, really, that like we spend so much time obsessing with going to the field, but we don't actually think, oh, hold on, I need to come back and I need to like write up my PhD and I need to like again start a new life into a certain degree after having this kind of long-term experience away somewhere. And throughout all of those things, I think like you do become a data collection device when you're doing fieldwork, but also you're a person with a full range of emotions and a life beyond your work. And so how are you going to like navigate your relationships, the relationships that are impacted as you move in and out of these spaces, you know, like how are you going to like have difficult conversations with a partner that you may have, or with about the fact you're going to be away for a long time? How are you going to stay in contact with your family? How are you going to then deal with the fact that you've made these really close connections with people in the field that you're then leaving behind in order to then think abstractly about writing up? And I found that a really difficult process. And to be honest with you, I'm only just starting to feel like I'm developing as a writer. And, you know, I came back in October 2019, the pandemic didn't help. But I think it's something to be really mindful of and to be aware of. And any self-care strategies that you have now before you go to the field are going to be really, really important while you're in the field and for when you come back. And so I can distribute the slides, and if anyone has any questions, then reach out to me. And there we go. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. That was a really great presentation. You all kind of like touched on little different aspects of preparing for the field. So yeah, no, thank you so much to all our presenters. Okay. I know we're meant to have finished now, so if people do have to dash, that's fine. But if anybody wants to stay for questions, that would be great. I know we've got one for Bianca, or a couple for Bianca. So if anybody else has any questions, please do put them in the chat or put your hand up, and yeah, we'll get to them. So I'm just finding, yeah, so Cassie asked you, Bianca, do you have the questions about fieldwork on a slide? They sound really good to help us think about the practicalities of the field.
I mean, I don't have them on a slide, but I can send them to you.
Brilliant. Maybe we can get the presentations on the slides and we can email them out to everybody if presenters are happy with that. Cool. And then next question. So the next question, Bianca, is from Siobhan. She's asked, did you actively make the distinction of Bianca coming home to Rachel, the researcher? Do you try to do this with those you know / encounter? And are you finding people reacting differently to you / performing for you as they know you are there as a researcher?
So I think Rachel as the researcher is Bianca the researcher, right? Well, lots of the people that I'm working with just met me for the first time, and they met me for the first time because I'm doing research. So I don't think to them it's, and because my research involves a lot of like practical participation, it's very hands-on. Up to this point, more than interviews, I don't think people really can quite do that distinction, and it's something that I actually struggle with a bit, because even though I've told people I'm doing research and everything is quite transparent, etc., and we've spoken about things over, I sometimes feel that people forget, and I'm a bit stressed about that, because then it's exclusively down to me to have to discern what moments are appropriate even for me to record, or how to record moments that I don't think perhaps people were really thinking of me as being doing research. People do tend to perform differently from me when we're doing interviews, because of course it's like a very different setup. And they are confronted with me very much as the researcher. I'm taking notes. That's also why I stopped recording interviews and started writing notes down, because I felt that if I was recording, people were just chit-chatting with me more, and I kind of wanted them to be aware of the fact that I'm doing research, because we spend so much time together as kind of friends. Should I also answer Isabel's? Okay, or should we go to someone else maybe?
No, if you're happy to answer Isabel's question. She's asking, did you find anyone reluctant to participate in your research? Did you find you had to gain people's trust in your research?
People are like surprisingly not reluctant at all to participate in research. Actually, they might not always understand, and it's really down to me not being able to explain what my research is about sometimes. But generally, people are quite willing to help out. If anything, difficulty comes with like practicalities, like fixing up meetings, for example, with people who have children or work, don't live, like lots of the people that I work with live in the valley, not really in the town. I don't have a car, so that kind of stuff can get a bit complicated. And I don't know if it kind of just happened that it's not that people were not trusting, people were quite trusting. I do think because of the kind of space where I do research, I do feel like I have to kind of earn my presence there by doing a lot of work. Sometimes that becomes a bit overwhelming, because then I'm trying to do everything all the time, which is just not feasible. Or to do anything that people ask me to do, which is also not feasible. But I think that kind of, I think I will figure out ways of putting boundaries and barriers. Yeah, and exerting more control over these relationships as time goes on. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Bianca. If anybody, has anyone got any more questions? I guess I've got one question. I was just going to ask each presenter if you could give like your main tip for like your overall main tip for preparing for fieldwork. Did you want to start?
I will
Yeah.
volunteer to not go first.
Okay. Tom, would you like to start?
Yeah, I did realize I wasn't on mute. You probably hear me clicking around. My main tip, I think, plan, keep calm, and try to think about your field work not as something that you do in order to collect data, but as something that will involve you living a particular life, and that will involve and quite often a lot of the questions that are problems for doing ethnography as a research methodology are also questions that are problems in being a human. And so that's a long-winded thing that I would say, but plan, be flexible, and remain calm, and everything will be great.
I think they're really good 3 points if you can if you can do them.
I've got one actually now, and it's piggybacking off of Tom, so I'm sorry. It's basically, yeah, very similar to what Tom was saying, but try to redefine your relationship with productivity, I think, and try to take some of the pressure off of like this really big expectations that your fieldwork is going to produce something enormous, that you're going to have endless amounts of data that's going to be really rich and it's going to revolutionize everything. I think try and not force yourself to have that expectation. Remember that gaps, silences, and a feeling of like you're not getting the right kind of data is also very, very insightful. So I remember when I did a few online interviews actually before coming on the scoping trip. And I remember coming out of them feeling like I'm just producing the same work that's already been done. I haven't been asking the right questions, probably because I was very, very rusty. I haven't done interviews in a very long time. And so, but then after some time thinking about it, it's not just, don't try and look at what they've said. Don't fixate too much on what answers they give you in verbal form. Think about the answers that they didn't give you, and that's insightful as well. What did they choose to say, and what could they have said differently? That's also, so there's data in these gaps that you can think of, and it's really important to think through those in something like a research diary, through field notes, etc. And yeah, just if you redefine your relationship to productivity, I really sympathize with Tom. Self-care is very important. It's something I really, really struggle with. And there are a lot of days where I'm bored, I'm frustrated, I feel like I'm getting nowhere, but there are things to be said about that as well, which is really important. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've thought of another thing.
Yeah, go for it.
Going off of Luke, is that
ping-ponging back each other.
Is that looking back at research methodology textbooks from when I did a field work, from having done field work, is that I found that a lot of them they're just based on lies. They're based on this kind of constructed certainty, and they're based on the idea that you can know what you're doing. Actually, a lot of the time people don't have a clue what they're doing, and they're making up as they go along, including your lecturers, including your supervisors, including professors. Like fieldwork is a process of making mistakes and learning as you go. And any textbook that tells you can make all of these plans and have this perfect form of data collection and all of these wonderful notes is lying. Like a lot of my field notes are crap, and they're crap because fieldwork is a challenge, and because it takes a lot of endurance, and I couldn't write the perfect field notes, and that's fine, because you deal with what you've got when you come back, and a lot of it is kind of embodied knowledge anyway. So and there was another thing that I was going to say, but I can't remember it. It was something on what Luke was saying about, oh, I can't remember. Anyway, that'll do.
You can let us know if it comes back to you. And finally, Bianca, what's your main tip for planning for fieldwork?
I'll be super quick. And yeah, it's building on what both Tom and Nick said. It is something that I think it's worth thinking of as part of your kind of life plan to some extent. I don't know, maybe it makes more sense once you are in the field, but as opposed to this like 1 year when you have to produce a lot of data that like then your future careers depends on. Also, of course, that's also true, sadly, about like the way academic labor is organized. Also, it's something that, yeah, you're gonna be doing for 1 year, yourself. So maybe, I don't know, try to make it speak. I mean, it will unavoidably speak to you as a person because you come up with the idea, like, but try to make it fit in your life, all the things you need, and be careful of the things that you don't need. So I don't know. Yeah, I said it would be quick, but I'll really finish now. Just like being in the field sometimes takes you to places where there are things that are triggering to you, that don't feel safe and don't feel comfortable, and that you must make allowances for to some extent, but also be mindful of that there'll be, yeah, so to try to make it livable and fit with your life and things that you need in your life to be happy.
I
Brilliant.
remember what I was going to say.
Go on then, Tom.
Have fun. I think that's like a really important thing to remember. Like, fieldwork is a great opportunity. You get to go somewhere different. You get to meet lots of new people. You get to build relationships, especially after like the horror of COVID. Like, I would bloody love to go and do fieldwork now, you know, and like have fun. It's an amazing opportunity. And if you're having fun, then the other thing, you know, if you're enjoying yourself, if you're happy, then other things will sort itself out. Which is not to suggest you have to be happy, but you know, it can be helpful.